April 18, 1945. The sky above Bavaria trembles. A sound never heard before in warfare tears through the clouds, a high-pitched scream, mechanical and furious, like the future itself breaking the sound barrier. Below, in a makeshift airfield carved from the rubble of the Reichsautobahn, German ground crews sprint across cratered concrete. Their hands are blackened with oil, their faces hollow with exhaustion. They push a sleek, gray arrow of an aircraft toward the runway, a Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. Its twin Junkers Jumo 004 engines glow faintly in the pre-dawn light, two eyes of fire promising salvation. The pilot, Oberleutnant Franz Schall, climbs into the narrow cockpit. His hands shake not from fear, but from hunger. He has eaten nothing but watered-down potato soup for 3 days. Around him, the Third Reich is collapsing. Soviet tanks are 60 kilometers east. American bombers darken the western horizon daily. But in this moment, strapped into the fastest aircraft ever built, Schall believes, he must believe, that Germany still commands a future. He throttles forward. The jet screams. And for 8 minutes, he is a god among propellers. 200 kilometers west, Captain William Wisner of the United States Army Air Forces adjusts his oxygen mask inside the cramped cockpit of his P-51 Mustang. The aircraft is not elegant, is not revolutionary. It is aluminum and rivets and mass production. It is one of 15,000 nearly identical machines rolling off American assembly lines every year, each one painted olive drab, each one carrying 6.50 caliber machine guns and enough fuel to escort bombers deep into Germany and back. Wisner does not feel like a god. He feels like a worker. He feels like part of a machine infinitely larger than himself. Below him, in tight formation, 47 other Mustangs fly in a wall of propeller-driven steel. They are not faster than the Messerschmitt. They are not more advanced. But they are there. They are always there. And that, in the arithmetic of total war, is all that matters. This is the story of two philosophies colliding in the sky. One built on genius. One built on quantity. One a scalpel. One a hammer. And in the crucible of 1945, the world learned which principle wins wars. The Messerschmitt Me 262 was born from desperation and brilliance in equal measure. In 1938, as the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, the Reich Aviation Ministry, planned for a war of rapid conquest, German engineers at Messerschmitt AG began exploring jet propulsion. The concept was not new. British engineer Frank Whittle had patented a jet engine in 1930. But the Germans, driven by a culture of technical perfectionism and a Führer obsessed with Wunderwaffen, wonder weapons, pursued the idea with religious fervor. By 1942, the Me 262 prototype achieved speeds exceeding 540 miles per hour, nearly 200 miles per hour faster than the fastest Allied fighters. It was a machine from tomorrow. Luftwaffe test pilots returned from early flights trembling with awe. General Adolf Galland, himself a decorated ace, flew the Me 262 in May 1943 and declared it felt as if an angel were pushing. He urged immediate mass production. Here, he believed, was the tool to reclaim the skies. But the Me 262 was also a child of a crumbling empire. Each jet required over 5,000 man-hours to construct. Its Jumo 004 engines, marvels of engineering, had a lifespan of just 10 to 25 hours before catastrophic failure. The turbine blades, ideally forged from heat-resistant nickel alloys, were instead made from low-grade steel and aluminum, because by 1943, Germany's access to strategic metals had been choked off by Allied bombing and naval blockades. The engines demanded a specific grade of synthetic fuel, J2, which required intact refineries. By 1944, those refineries were burning. The jets needed long, smooth runways. Allied bombers targeted every airfield. The aircraft needed pilots trained in jet tactics. The Luftwaffe's training programs, starved of fuel and time, were disintegrating. And then there was Hitler. In November 1943, the Führer visited Messerschmitt's facility, saw the Me 262, and asked a single question: "Can this aircraft carry bombs?" When told it could, he ordered it converted into a high-speed bomber, the Sturmvogel, Stormbird. Months were lost. The jet that could have hunted Allied bombers was instead tasked with delivering one-ton payloads onto advancing armies, a role for which it was catastrophically ill-suited. By the time Hitler reversed the order in late 1944, the war was lost. Still, they built them. In underground factories. In forests. in caves carved into Austrian mountains. Slave laborers from Dachau and Mauthausen assemble components with frostbitten fingers. Engineers work 20-hour shifts, driven by a mix of patriotic fervor, fear of the Gestapo, and the intoxicating possibility that this machine, this single innovation, might alter history's verdict. By the war's end, approximately 1,430 Me-262s had been completed. Fewer than 300 ever saw combat. Of those, perhaps 150 were operational at any given time. They were scattered across dying airfields, grounded by fuel shortages, by missing parts, by pilots who had trained for weeks instead of months. And yet, when they flew, they were magnificent and terrible. They slashed through bomber formations like scythes. Allied pilots radioed in disbelief as silver darts passed them at incomprehensible speeds. The Me-262 achieved a kill ratio estimated between 4-to-1 and 5-to-1 against Allied aircraft. In the hands of aces like Adolf Galland, Heinrich Bahr, and Franz Schall, the jets seemed invincible. But invincibility requires more than a superior machine. It requires fuel. It requires infrastructure. It requires the industrial capacity to replace losses. It requires an economy not on fire. And by 1945, Germany had none of these things. Across the Atlantic, a different calculus governed American air power. The P-51 Mustang was not born from a vision of technological supremacy. It was born from a British request in 1940 when the Royal Air Force, desperate for fighters, asked North American Aviation to produce a new design in record time. The first prototype flew in October 1940, just 102 days after the contract was signed. Early models, powered by Allison engines, were fast but underwhelming at high altitude. Then in 1942, British engineers married the Mustang airframe to the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. The result was alchemy. The P-51B and subsequent D models could cruise at 400 miles per hour, climb to 42,000 feet, and critically, carry enough fuel, with external drop tanks, to escort bombers from England to Berlin and back. It was not the fastest fighter. It was not the most heavily armed. It was simply the right tool, in the right quantity, at the right time. American factories did not build the P-51 one at a time. They built it like Ford built automobiles. Assembly lines in California, Ohio, and Texas churned out Mustangs at a rate the German aviation industry could not fathom. By war's end, over 15,000 P-51s had rolled off production lines. The cost per unit, approximately $51,000. A Me-262 cost over 100,000 Reichsmarks, plus uncounted hours of skilled labor. But the disparity was not merely economic. It was philosophical. American industry assumed losses. It planned for attrition. Every P-51 shot down was tragic but replaceable. Every pilot killed was mourning, but another graduated from training fields in Arizona and Florida every week. The system was designed to absorb damage and continue. The young men who flew the Mustangs were not supermen. They were farm boys from Iowa and mechanics from Detroit and college, students from New England. They trained for a year, sometimes less. They learned to fly in formation, to communicate over crackling radios, to trust the man on their wing. They were taught that survival came not from individual heroism, but from collective discipline. They flew in groups of 4, of 12, of 48. They covered each other. They called out threats. They operated as a single organism. And when one fell, the formation closed the gap and continued. By contrast, the Luftwaffe's ace culture, which had produced legends like Erich Hartmann with 352 confirmed kills and Gerhard Barkhorn with 301, was a double-edged sword. Aces were irreplaceable. When they died, entire squadrons lost cohesion. German pilot training, once the finest in the world, had been reduced by 1944 to mere weeks. Rookie pilots climbed into Me-262s with fewer than 50 hours in jet aircraft. They faced American pilots with hundreds of hours in combat. The results were predictable. Many Me-262s were destroyed not in dogfights, but on takeoff and landing, when the jets, slow and vulnerable, were ambushed by prowling Mustangs stationed near German airfields. Allied pilots called it rat hunting. They would orbit known jet bases at high altitude, wait for the telltale smoke plume of a jet's takeoff, then dive. The Me-262 could outrun anything in level flight, but during those first 30 seconds after wheels up, it was a target. Dozens of jets died this way, their pilots never reaching combat speed. Oberleutnant Franz Schall did not die that way. He was too skilled. By April 1945, he had 14 confirmed kills, many against four-engine bombers. He had learned Me-262's secrets, its brutal acceleration, its wide turning radius, its tendency to flame out if the throttles were advanced too quickly. He had survived when so many others had not. But skill could not manufacture fuel. It could not repair a shattered runway. It could not conjure spare engines from air. On the morning of April 10, 1945, Scholl took off from Parchim Airfield in northern Germany. The mission: intercept a formation of American B-17 bombers returning from a raid on Berlin. His jet screamed into the sky. He climbed through 20,000 feet, then 30,000. Below, the German countryside was a patchwork of craters and burning towns. Ahead, the bomber streams stretched across the horizon, a constellation of silver dots escorted by a cloud of Mustangs. Scholl chose his angle. He dove. At 500 miles per hour, he closed on AB-17 flying at the formation's edge. His 430 million Malawian Kwacha's 108 cannons roared. The bomber shuddered, trailing smoke. Scholl rolled away, already scanning for the next target. But then the radio crackled. A voice frantic, "Achtung! Mustangs 6 o'clock high." Scholl pulled into a climbing turn. Too late. 3 P-51s, led by Lieutenant Robert Winks of the 339 Fighter Squadron, had seen the jet's attack run. They had positioned themselves above and behind, waiting. As Scholl's jet slowed in the climb, Winks fired. 50 caliber rounds stitched across the Me-262's fuselage. One engine exploded. The jet tumbled. Scholl ejected, his parachute blossoming white against the gray sky. He landed in a field 20 kilometers from the ruins of Dresden. Soviet troops found him 3 hours later. He survived the war. His jet did not. This scene repeated itself, in variations, across Germany in the war's final months. The Me-262 was faster, deadlier, more advanced. But it was outnumbered 50-1. It was grounded by lack of fuel, by damaged runways, by missing parts. And when it flew, it was hunted, not by superior aircraft, but by an avalanche of adequate ones. The Mustangs could not outrun the jets, but they could outlast them. They could wait at jet bases. They could swarm damaged jets limping home. They could replace losses overnight. The Me-262 pilots began each mission knowing they might face 40 enemies. The Mustang pilots began each mission knowing that if they were shot down, 40 more would take their place tomorrow. The symbolism of these two aircraft, the sleek jet and the mass-produced Mustang, extended beyond mechanics into ideology. The Me-262 represented the German faith in qualitative superiority, in the power of the exceptional individual, in the Nietzschean Übermensch applied to engineering. It was a philosophy that had served Germany well in the war's early years, when small numbers of highly trained forces achieved stunning victories through speed and precision. But by 1944, that philosophy had collided with the arithmetic of industrial attrition. The Mustang, by contrast, embodied the American philosophy of democratic abundance, the idea that mass production, standardization, and collective effort could overwhelm any elite. The United States did not need to build the best fighter. It needed to build enough good fighters. It did not need the best pilots. It needed enough competent pilots. And it had them. American factories in 1944 produced more aircraft in a single month than Germany produced in a year. The Willow Run plant in Michigan, operated by Ford, turned out one B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes at peak production. The scale was incomprehensible to German planners, who still relied on skilled craftsmen assembling components by hand. When Albert Speer, the Reich's Minister of Armaments, received intelligence reports on American production figures, he initially dismissed them as Allied propaganda. No nation, he reasoned, could produce machines at such volume. He was wrong. The United States in World War II became the arsenal of democracy not through genius, but through the grinding, relentless application of industrial capitalism. Rosie the Riveter was not a symbol of individual heroism. She was a symbol of systemic power, millions of workers, each a cog, together forming an unstoppable machine. The men who flew the Me-262 knew this. They saw the bomber streams growing larger every week. They saw the Mustangs multiplying. They shot down 3, 5, 10 enemies and returned to find their own bases in ruins. In diaries and letters, Me-262 pilots recorded a creeping despair. They had the better aircraft. They were man for man, often the better pilots. But they were drowning. One Luftwaffe ace, Heinrich Bahr, who scored 16 kills in the Me-262 before the war's end, later reflected, "We were trying to stop a flood with a teacup." Another, Johannes Steinhoff, wrote, "The jet gave us hope. But hope cannot fight 1,000 bombers." The final months of the air war over Germany became a grim tableau of technological mismatch. Me-262s, when they flew, still inflicted terrible losses. On March 18, 1945, a formation of 37 Me-262s from Jagdverband 44, a unit led by Adolf Galland and staffed by veteran aces, intercepted a bomber stream near Berlin. In 12 minutes, they shot down 12 B-17s and 6 escorting fighters. But 7 jets were lost, 3 to enemy fire, 4 to mechanical failure or fuel exhaustion. The unit could not replace them. The bombers returned the next day, and the day after, and the day after that. Each raid involved 800, 1,000, sometimes 1,200 heavy bombers, each escorted by hundreds of fighters. The Luftwaffe could muster perhaps 60 operational fighters total, jets and propeller aircraft combined. The mathematics were final. By April 1945, Me-262 units were cannibalizing wrecks to keep a handful of jets flying. Pilots flew without radios because there were none to install. They flew without ammunition because factories had been overrun. On April 19, 1945, Jagdverband 44 flew its last combat mission. Adolf Galland, the legendary ace, the man who had believed in the jet more than anyone, led 6 Me-262s against a formation of B-26 Marauders. They shot down 2 bombers. 1 jet was lost. The next day, American tanks reached the unit's airfield. The remaining jets were destroyed by their own crews. Galland surrendered to American forces on May 14, 1945. When interrogated, he was asked what Germany needed to win the air war. He replied, 2 years and 2,000 Me-262s in 1943. He did not have either. Across the Reich, the pattern repeated. Me-262s sat abandoned on cratered runways, their engines cold, their fuel tanks empty, their canopies shattered by strafing runs. Some were captured intact. American and British engineers swarmed over them, marveling at the swept wings, the axial flow turbojets, the innovations that would shape jet aviation for decades. But they also noted the crude construction, the brittle welds, the ersatz materials. The Me-262 was a masterpiece and a monument to scarcity. It was what genius looked like when divorced from resources. The P-51 Mustang, meanwhile, ended the war as perhaps the most ubiquitous symbol of Allied air power. By May 1945, Mustangs had flown over 15,000 combat sorties, destroyed over 4,900 enemy aircraft in the air, and demolished thousands more on the ground. They had escorted bombers to every corner of the Third Reich. They had strafed trains, trucks, and tanks. They had protected the D-Day landings. They had served in every theater, Europe, the Pacific, the Mediterranean. They were not mourned as lost marvels. They were retired, sold off, scrapped. Thousands ended their days in desert boneyards, their aluminum melted down for new purposes. They were tools used and discarded. And in that disposability was a kind of victory. The young men who flew them returned home to ticker tape parades, to the GI Bill, to college educations and suburban houses and lives unimaginable to their German counterparts. Captain William Wisner, who survived the war with 15.5 confirmed kills, returned to Ohio, became a test pilot, and died in 1989. Old and honored. Oberleutnant Franz Schall, captured by the Soviets, spent 4 years in a labor camp, returned to a divided Germany, and lived quietly until 1980, his war a ghost he rarely discussed. They never met. They never knew each other's names. But in the skies above Bavaria in April 1945, they had enacted the final proof of a principle, that wars are not won by miracles, but by the patient, relentless accumulation of adequate force. There is a museum in Dayton, Ohio, at the National Museum of the United States Air Force, where restored Me-262 sits beside a restored P-51 Mustang. Visitors walk between them, comparing sleek jet to blunt propeller, future to present. Docents explain the speed difference, the armament, the production numbers. But numbers cannot capture the existential difference. The Me-262 was built by a regime that believed in the triumph of will, in the power of superior men and superior machines to defy material reality. It was the final beautiful lie of fascism, that excellence could substitute for abundance, that genius could overcome system, that 1,000 warriors could defeat 1,000,000 soldiers. The P-51 was built by a democracy that believed in none of those things. It believed in factories. It believed in training programs. It believed in the interchangeable worker and the replaceable pilot and the standardized part. It believed in enough. 75,000 American aviators died in World War II. They were mourned individually and collectively, but the system that sent them to war survived every loss. It had been designed to. The Luftwaffe lost 70,000 aircrew and could not replace them. Its training schools had been bombed. Its fuel reserves exhausted. Its doctrine shattered. By the end, teenage boys were being sent into combat with 30 hours of flight time, flying jets they barely understood against enemies who had become professionals in survival. The Me-262 was a better aircraft than the P-51. It was faster, more advanced, more lethal in the right hands. But it was a weapon of a dying philosophy, and no amount of engineering genius could resurrect it. The jet and the swarm met in the skies of 1945, and the swarm won, not through superiority, but through inevitability. In the end, the lesson was not about aircraft. It was about empires. The Third Reich built 1,500 jets and lost the sky. The United States built 15,000 propeller fighters and owned it. One side believed in the exceptional. The other believed in the sufficient, mass-produced, and relentless. History recorded which belief survives contact with total war. The roar of the Merlin engine, multiplied 10,000 times, drowned out the scream of the jet. And in that droning, relentless thunder was the sound of democracy grinding the future into dust and then rebuilding it on its own terms.